Hi, everyone. This is Matt Rogers.
And this is Bowen Yang.
We're co-hosts of the podcast Las Culturistas. Question for you. Wouldn't you like to feel it all?
Well, Trojan, America's #1 condom, is here to help with Trojan Bearskin Raw.
Ooh, America's thinnest latex condom helps you enjoy a more natural experience and features a silky smooth lubricant to increase comfort and sensitivity.
It's like putting on a silky glove, except not on your hand, on another part.
You know the part. And if you don't, ask your mom. Pick up some Trojan Bearskin Raw condoms. Triple tested and trusted for over 100 years.
Trojan, feel your best. Get yours on.
Welcome to Scary Time by Indie Drop-In Network. Each week we feature an episode from the best independent creators. Subscribe for great scary content. If you would like to help support indie creators, check out our Patreon at the bottom of the show notes. Today's episode is from Nopeville. Don't forget to check out the show notes for links to subscribe and follow on social media. Enjoy the show.
Begin.
Down this road is a small city once thriving and full of life, but now desolate and abandoned. Well, abandoned save for the horrors rumored to reside within, which I presume is why you're here. Now, there's nothing wrong with a little morbid curiosity, but please, remember to stay close to your guides. We wouldn't want anyone to get left behind now.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Nopeville, your favorite city in the whole entire world. We know it. We know it.
Yep. That's why you keep coming back.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
All the worst of the worst come in here. I guess that includes you guys.
Yeah. Welcome.
No, best of the best. And before we get into today's tour, we have a wonderful 5-star review from Joshimi.
Yay.
They say, awesome podcast. Great podcast. The hosts are awesome together. I have actually learned a lot of cool stuff from listening that I didn't know. I really enjoy that the hosts dive into both the lore and history of the subject as well as the pop culture references. Keep up the great work. Thank you.
Yay. Thank you.
And we will. We are your tour guides. I'm Christine.
And I'm Jen.
And today's episode is going to be a hell of a ride.
Yep, it's going to be a tough one, so buckle up.
Yeah, just prepare yourselves mentally because we thought it would be fun times to bring you a super special topic before our holiday of eating over here in the States, Thanksgiving.
Yeah, we're going to bring you to our cannibal side of Nopeville.
The cannibal camp.
Yep. Camp Cannibal.
Instead of Cape Canaveral. Cape Cannibal.
Cape Cannibal. I said Camp Cannibal, but I like Cape Cannibal.
So tour guide Jen is going to start us out with her addition to the family.
Great. Yeah, you don't want him around your Thanksgiving table.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Happy Thanksgiving.
This was our trigger warning, by the way. Just so you know, everything we're about to discuss is not going to be for the faint of heart.
It is not. If you have a problem with gruesome, graphic, gory details, then feel free to turn this off now. We won't be offended.
Yeah, we will totally understand. We have to be here.
Let's get to it. All right, so I'm going to bring you to visit Issei Sagawa. Issei Sagawa was born prematurely on April 26, 1949 in Kobe, Japan. He was said to be so small when he was born that he was able to fit into the palm of his father's hand.
Oh, wow.
And doctors at the time didn't think he would survive. Yeah. Throughout childhood, he continued to have a small frame compared to his peers and even his younger brother. He always felt self-conscious of his body while the children around him had round, full bodies.
Mm-hmm.
He grew up with strict but supportive parents. His father was a wealthy businessman, and his parents doted on him, giving him a childhood that he said was the best time of his life.
Mm-hmm.
He and his brother were close in age, so his parents practically raised them as if they were twins. Because of his weak and frail body, he said that his parents tried to protect him too much, however, and he always felt he was small, weak, and ugly like a small monkey.
Oh.
His words. This self-loathing image of himself carried with him throughout his entire life.
Mm-hmm.
As a child, he used to play with his uncle, brother, and father, where his uncle would dress up like a hungry giant that would kidnap and eat children. His father was the knight in shining armor that tried to save him, but ultimately was defeated and died at the hands of the giant. He and his brother were the victims eventually getting eaten by the giant, to which he later said sparked his fantasy of being eaten by a beautiful woman.
What in the actual hell is that kind of play?
I have no idea.
Like, the knight's supposed to win.
Yeah, I know, right?
What is this shit?
I was like, that's a sick twist.
Right.
All right. As he grew older, he said that sex was a taboo topic in his household and that he never even heard his parents say the word sex at all. When he hit puberty, the sexual urges inside him overflowed, but he said he didn't even know how to masturbate, and he was ashamed to even bring it up to his family. He said he would do strange things to get himself to orgasm, like even getting the dog to lick him.
Oh.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. One day while he was in secondary school, he saw the thigh of a male student wearing shorts, and he had a strange sensation overcome him and thought, that looks tasty.
Okay.
Knowing that he wasn't homosexual, however, he knew that this might have been the start of his obsession with cannibalism. As a teen, still self-conscious of his small stature, he isolated himself from his peers, afraid to talk to any girl, but that didn't stop him from fantasizing about them. He was especially interested in Western women. He obsessed over the tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Western girls that Hollywood depicted and fell for the likes of actresses like Grace Kelly. He had a very specific fantasy of first caressing them, then eating the woman, thus combining both his sexual and cannibalistic desires.
Right.
He did seek psychiatric help at the age of 15 when his sexual fantasy started to take a more violent and deadly turn. The psychiatrist had told him that in order to help him, he would have to come to speak to him in person rather than on the phone, but Sagawa was too ashamed to ever talk to anyone about it in person and didn't pursue help any further. He did try to talk to his brother about his secret desires, however, his brother just brushed it off, thinking he was just joking. So he was isolated from his family, and he was isolated from professional help because he couldn't just talk about it.
Yeah.
When he was 23, a young German girl moved into his neighborhood in Tokyo. He stalked her over a few days, finding out she would frequently leave her window open on warm nights. One day, he took his chance to finally be with a Western girl, and he snuck into her window. To his fortune, she was asleep. He looked around the room to find a weapon he could use to knock her unconscious and laid eyes on an umbrella. He moved closer to her before he was able to do anything. His knee brushed her stomach and she woke up. Upon seeing him, she immediately started screaming and he tried to escape, but she overpowered him because she was bigger than him. Because he was a tiny little 4-foot man. And she called the police. He was arrested and charged with attempted rape, but he never confessed to his true desire, which was not to kill her per se, but to slice off part of her butt cheek and eat it.
Ew.
All charges were dropped after his affluent father paid a settlement to the woman. After completing schooling at Wako University in Tokyo, he decided to take up a graduate program at Sorbonne University in Paris in 1977 to get his doctorate in literature. There, he was able to be surrounded by the Western girls he so deeply fawned over.
Oh boy.
His cannibalistic urges showed no sign of ceasing. He bought a .22 caliber rifle when he first moved to Paris for, quote, self-defense. He said that almost every night he would have a sex worker over and would try to shoot them from behind as they were washing up, but he wasn't ever able to go through with it.
Oh my God.
He said he tried hundreds of times, but for some reason he wasn't able to pull the trigger. He said after so many attempts, it became less about wanting to eat them, but more of an obsession that he had to carry out this, quote, ritual of killing a girl no matter what. He said what perhaps stopped him from pulling the trigger was more instinct than morals, knowing that the moment he pulls the trigger, the world around him would shatter into pieces.
Okay.
It wasn't long before he met 25-year-old Renee Hartfelt, a fellow student in one of his classes. He said that she was kind, friendly, open-minded, and warm. She was one of the few students that would actually talk to Sagawa, with him being socially awkward and frail. He said that one night he invited a bunch of classmates to his apartment to enjoy some Japanese cuisine, but in the end, only Renee showed up. He said that she was genuinely interested in being friends with him because she enjoyed his intelligence and his company. He said that the moment he saw her wash her hands in the bathroom, it reminded him of all the sex workers that would wash up, and this made her his target for his next ritual. From that night, they continued to forge a friendship, and he gained Renee's trust. Apparently, she had even written to her parents about meeting him and told them how nice he was and that she appreciates his company. They'd have dinner together in his apartment, and he even asked Renee to be his German tutor. Being tight on money, and with Sagawa proposing a significant payment due to his wealthy family, Renee accepted. One night, when she was sitting on the floor reading German poetry, Sagawa snuck behind her with the rifle and fired, but the gun misfired. At this time, Renee didn't hear anything and continued reading aloud as Sagawa snuck the rifle back to its hiding place and propped himself sitting next to Renee.
Don't they click?
Yeah, but she didn't hear it.
I know, but like how?
Because she was sitting there reading out loud.
I guess if she was that absorbed in what she was doing, she's not going to hear the
Yeah.
impotent click of a
Yeah, you're not going to be suspicious that someone's like
trying to murder you.
doing something behind you, right? Yeah. Now, you think this would have stopped him from trying again, but instead it only fueled his desire to complete his ritual. He invited her back the next night, on June 11th, 1981, under the false pretense that his German teacher wanted him to have a tape recording of a German poem as an assignment. He asked her for this favor, and she obliged. She sat in the desk in his apartment and read the poem out loud with her back to Sagawa. He pointed the rifle at the back of her head and fired. This time the gun went off, striking her in the back of the neck. She died instantly and fell to the floor. Sagawa said he fainted after seeing her lifeless body bleeding out on his living room floor. In a later interview with Vice, he said the moment the girl became a corpse, he knew he lost an important friend and even regretted killing her for a moment. He said that maybe if he had one more dinner together where they got to know each other more and talked about their families, he wouldn't have been able to kill her. He also said that he wouldn't be able to live out his fantasies with someone he knew well, and that's why he tried to initially fulfill his desires with sex workers. He also said, quote, I had a lot of other female friends as well, but I would never dreamed of eating them since I considered them human beings with their own individual personalities. End quote.
So essentially what I'm getting from this is she washed her hands and suddenly wasn't a human being anymore.
He wasn't as close to her as his other friends. And so to him, like, and especially like also from that quote, he doesn't view sex workers as humans. But that's why he was saying, if I just had dinner with her one more time, I probably wouldn't have been able to do it.
God.
Yeah. After he came to, he saw he was laying next to Renee's corpse and even thought about calling an ambulance. Before he did, however, he thought to himself, quote, hang on, don't be stupid. You've been dreaming about this for 32 years, and now it's actually happening. He undressed her body and was elated by the fact that she couldn't fight back. He decided he wanted to eat her butt first.
Okay.
He said that he wanted to eat the right butt cheek since the left was closest to the heart, so it would have more blood, and blood scared him.
Oh, okay.
Eye roll.
Yeah.
He first tried to bite straight into it, but he wasn't able to, saying that human meat is tough, and he hurt his jaw trying.
Good. You deserve it.
He grabbed a kitchen knife, but wasn't able to cut through the skin. He went to the market and bought an electric carving knife and was able to finally cut into the flesh he so deeply desired.
God.
When he made the first incision, he was surprised to see that he wasn't immediately seeing the red meat. Instead, he saw a corn-like substance that was fat. He continued cutting down until he saw the red meat, tore off a piece, and put it in his mouth. He said it melted in his mouth like fine tuna from a sushi restaurant.
Gross.
He then cut off a piece of her nose and her nipple and ate them. He cut off her left breast and started to eat that, but decided against it after realizing it didn't taste good because it was all fat.
Yeah.
After savoring different parts of her body and fulfilling his cannibalistic fantasy, he raped her corpse.
Of course he did.
He continued to do this again and again over the next 48 hours, eating her flesh and having sex with her corpse.
Gross.
He cut off chunks of her legs and stuck them in the freezer for later meals. He even stockpiled mementos such as the audio recording of the murder, because the tape recorder was still going at the time he killed her,
Right.
and took photos of the body after every part he cut off.
Yeah.
And he would videotape what he would do to the body. He said the meat got sweeter over time, and he would experiment with different ways to eat the flesh, whether raw, fried, or with a side of mustard.
Okay.
Yeah. Eventually, he said the honeymoon period was over, and he was afraid the body would start to rot. He dragged the corpse to the bathroom and cut up the remainder of her body and stuffed the pieces into 2 suitcases. He hailed the taxi, and he said when the taxi driver picked up the 2 bags, he joked, asking if there was a corpse in there. Sagawa just laughed and said, no, it's full of books. The taxi driver thought it odd that instead of taking Sagawa to a train station or the airport, since he had these 2 heavy luggages, Sagawa asked him to take him to a nearby park, the Bois de Boulogne.
Interesting.
Sagawa dragged the 2 heavy suitcases through the very public park with the goal of dumping the bags in the lake. There were people gawking at him, watching this small Asian man struggle with this heavy load.
All right.
With what happened at this park, this is where some sources differ. One source said he was overcome with fatigue with dragging the heavy suitcases, so he decided to rest on a bench and ended up falling asleep. He then awoke to an old man screaming after opening up the bag and seeing a dead body. Then Sagawa just got up and walked away. Another source said he dropped the suitcases and walked away when people started to notice that blood was dripping from the suitcases.
All right.
In an interview, Sagawa himself said that he was mesmerized by the setting sun, and he stopped to admire it. That's when an old man came up from behind him and peeked inside his bags. He was horrified by what he saw and asked Sagawa if the bags were his, to which he denied. Then the man started screaming, "Murderer!" and Sagawa just walked away.
So and basically in every story, he just walked away from the bags in the park. But
with a ton of witnesses.
right.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Like, he had no remorse. He had no emotion. People saw him. He's like, all right. And then he just fucking left the body.
Yeah.
Either way, he left the dismembered corpse in the bags in the park and returned to his apartment. After 2 days, police showed up with a warrant and he let the police inside.
Mm-hmm.
When they entered the apartment, there were immediate signs of cannibalism as soon as they walked in.
Wow.
The refrigerator was filled with packs of meat cut from a human body, and there were plates with remnants of a meal of human flesh with condiments. They also found Renee's photo ID.
Mm-hmm.
So they found out who the victim was.
Right.
Really quick.
Yeah.
Sagawa immediately confessed to killing a young woman, saying, quote, I killed her to eat her flesh.
Okay.
Because he said that in order to fulfill his cannibalistic desires, the only way he could do it is to kill a woman first.
Mm-hmm.
The police were taken aback by his willingness to confess. Sagawa didn't hesitate or hold back any small detail, but he also had no remorse or regret.
All right.
Although in later interviews, he did say his only regret was that he didn't eat her when she was alive, saying, quote, what I truly wish was to eat her living flesh. Nobody believes me, but my ultimate intention was to eat her, not necessarily kill her.
Okay.
Unquote. Yeah, he actually said he was relieved when he was arrested because he could finally be able to communicate with people.
Okay.
Remember I said before he was
Yeah.
isolated and he couldn't talk to anybody, and now he finally can after having committed the act?
Yeah, now you can talk to the police about everything because they already know.
Before committing the crime, he actually vacationed in Greece where he met a butcher and his wife. They had a great time and had dinner and drinks together with conversations on how to cut a body.
Oh, okay.
Sagawa said he had written a letter to this man after he killed Renee thanking him, but he never received a response. Right. During the 2 years he was awaiting trial, he was examined by 3 psychiatrists who said he was not self-assured, was oversensitive, and emotionally cold. He was also self-satisfied with the crime he committed.
Mm-hmm.
His father again used his financial influence and reputation and was able to hire the most expensive lawyer in France to represent his son.
Of course.
He was ultimately ruled insane and unfit to stand trial by a French judge, and that he should spend the rest of his life in a mental institution. A trial was never conducted for this case because they don't try people who were mentally ill.
Mm-hmm.
Renee's family wanted a medical second opinion, but it ultimately never happened, and her family was never granted the justice they deserved.
Yeah.
While he was in the mental institution in France, he isolated himself from the other, quote, deranged patients and wrote about his life.
Oh my God.
He found this therapeutic and a chance to be introspective and learn about himself. He was visited by Japanese writer Inihiko Yomota, whom he had agreed to give a copy of his memoir.
Mm-hmm.
Yomota took the memoir and published it under the name In the Fog. Sagawa felt betrayed by this because he didn't consent to Yomota publishing his memoir.
Right.
However, the book ended up becoming a bestseller in Japan. After realizing that people wanted to actually listen to his story, he started to develop pride in his accomplishment.
Of course.
The sensationalism led to a French magazine, the Paris Match, to the insensitive act of publishing photos of the crime scene and Renee's dismembered body.
Mm.
This was the last straw the public had with Sagawa, and they wanted him out of their country.
Right.
They grew angry that this man was being treated on their taxpayer money and demanded he be deported back to Japan. So as not to cause more outrage, and knowing that the media and public would be flocking to the airport upon his return, his father staged a show where when he landed, he would immediately be taken to the mental hospital by an ambulance to appease reporters and the citizens of Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of staying there for life, like the French government had said, he was released after only 18 months. After doctors diagnosed him with a personality disorder.
Oh, okay.
Each mental health professional deemed him sane, stating that, quote, sexual perversion had led to the murder. They all agreed that he should spend the rest of his life in prison,
Right.
not a mental institution. The reason he was able to be released was that in France, since the charges were dropped after he was deemed unfit to stand trial, the documents were sealed. He didn't commit the crime in Japan, so the Japanese government couldn't prosecute him.
Right.
He was actually essentially a free man once he set foot on Japanese soil. So, due to this little loophole,
Yeah.
he was a free man after fully confessing, and everybody knew what he did.
Yeah.
Yep. Upon his release, he became a minor celebrity in the eyes of the Japanese public. He was approached by Japanese magazines, publishers, and TV shows since Japan was in an economic bubble and would throw money at anything that would warrant entertainment. Makoto Watanabe, a professor at Hokkaido Bunkyo University, said, quote, Sagawa was never forced to take responsibility for his actions, but because he was never found guilty, then in the eyes of many Japanese, he was not responsible. The sense that it could be overlooked and things could go on smoothly, nobody wanted to raise a voice against the decision to hire him. Sagawa was alone. His father resigned from his high-powered job, his brother developed stress-related asthma, and his mother even attempted to commit suicide.
Oh, wow.
He was unemployed and had no money, and everyone knew this, so he agreed to partake in the public appearances. So someone would just approach him, say, hey, you want to be in this? He's like, yeah, sure.
Right.
After the publishing of his first book, he went on to publish 19 more about his crime.
What the fuck? How?
And his cannibalistic urges, and the public ate it up. Pun intended. He was even invited to multiple TV interviews and variety shows. It was theorized that the reason networks agreed to even host him at all is because networks would compete with each other for ratings, and having a sensational murderer on certainly would grab the public's attention. In a TV interview with Vice, he picked up a copy of a book that he wrote, and he said, quote, caused a lot of controversy. In the book, he had translated his psychiatric evaluation from the French mental hospital and even included photos he took of Renee's body in the crime scene. He said a lot of the people want his autograph on this particular book and said that, quote, Japanese people nowadays are stupid. They have the same mentality as I, a terrible criminal, did. End quote.
Wow.
Yeah.
Shots fired.
Right? He did everything from writing and drawing a manga about the incident, which in these documentaries, they showed the very disturbing images.
Of course.
Of his manga. Yeah, I'm like, I don't need to
What's
see
it
that.
called?
I don't remember, but he was approached by a manga artist to do this. Even starring in porn.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Some of the films he did would star tall Western women.
Of course they did.
Yep. In one, he took a Dutch woman to a Holland-themed amusement park.
Okay.
He mentioned they chose that location because Renee's mom was Dutch and it reminded him of Renee.
Wow.
So in this documentary, he was smiling not as like a dig at Renee, but more like he was reminiscing about her. Oh yeah, Renee was part Dutch.
Yeah, like
So I did this for her.
Yeah, like he's just thinking back on his fond friend.
Yep. That he fucking murdered.
Yeah.
Another porn film he did involved a young Japanese woman who had no idea who he was. She was only told that he was a writer and was a very interesting person. He set up the film so that he would only tell her who he was after they had sex. After they had sex, he then took out his books and showed her the photos of his crime and told her what he did in detail. Later, she's shown in the car crying, thinking about how horrible of a person he was.
Yeah.
You could see how uncomfortable she was. He was proudly showcasing the photos.
Yeah.
And she was just so uncomfortable. Like, she had a blanket over her legs. Like, she was super closed and tight. Like, she just didn't want to hear anymore. And then, like, they interviewed her in the car and she was crying.
Yeah, because it's like, now you're going to make me talk about what I just dealt with. And I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah. To further drive home the fact that this guy is a disgusting, misogynistic, pitiful excuse for a human being, he said that a good female acquaintance of his used to let him drink her urine and spit, but since she got married and pregnant, she stopped doing this.
Gross.
He said that she would leave bottles of her urine at his doorstep after she had given birth, but he couldn't continue accepting it since it, quote, reeked of motherhood, and he said he no longer saw her as a sexual female being, but could only see her as a mother.
All right.
Yeah. Disgusting. One producer approached him to make a film where he said he had no idea what he was getting into. The director would make him do strange things, and in this Vice interview, he shows some of the clips of the film. He reenacted Little Red Riding Hood, where he played a wolf that wanted to eat the girl. They would randomly measure his strength and physical ability and would laugh at him when he wasn't able to do anything because of his small stature. It was such a random fucking video. They showed it in this interview.
I believe it.
Yeah. He was interviewed for a magazine that was featuring a story about another Japanese cannibalistic serial killer, Tsutomu Miyazaki, who killed, raped, and ate 4 young girls. He was ultimately caught and hanged for his crimes. In this interview, he was asked for his opinion on how the mindset that someone would have in order to commit such a heinous crime. Sagawa said he was disgusted by Miyazaki's need to commit the same crime over and over since he himself was sickened by the reality of his own crime. He would never think about committing it again. Right? So all of a sudden he has a moral high ground.
Yeah. Okay. But you're going to continue to profit off this act and tell people about it.
Yep. He was unchecked and unsupervised for decades. He would even meet with Western women under a false name and would pay for them to go on vacations with him.
Okay.
There were 2 women in particular that he vacationed with to Canada, India, Thailand, Mexico, and Iceland. He said he never had sex with them and they only used him to pay for the trips, but they would take sexy and lewd photos for him.
Okay.
And he has a photo album of this that he showed. Yeah. He said they even got him into taking drugs. He would steal money from his father's wallet or use his credit card and even sell some of his brother's belongings in order to pay for these female escorts.
Okay.
He said he doesn't feel cured, but he doesn't want to kill anyone anymore, even though he still gets cannibalistic urges. He said he sees women with long, beautiful legs. He just wants to eat them or take a bite out of them. He doesn't want to kill them.
I mean, but he never wanted to kill her either.
Yeah. But in his mind, the only way he could actually eat her is to kill her.
Right. Well,
catch 22, right?
I said that's also not wrong. I don't imagine she would have let him eat her if he wasn't dead.
Yeah, right? He said, quote, "It's simply a fetish. For example, if a normal man fancied a girl, he'd naturally feel a desire to see her as often as possible, to be close to her, to smell her and kiss her, right? To me, eating is just an extension of that. Frankly, I can't fathom why everyone doesn't feel the urge to eat, to consume other people." End quote. Now he says he no longer wants to be the one to eat, but rather he'd like to be the one killed, ripped apart, and eaten, but only by a beautiful woman, of course. Right. Today, he lives off of his inheritance since both his parents have since passed. He also still gets money from his interviews he does. In 2013, he suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and has since been taken care of by his brother and a caretaker. He also suffers from diabetes and has undergone a gastrectomy and has to be fed through a tube.
Okay.
His brother has stated that Sagawa still gets urges to eat a woman. In a previous interview, he has stated, quote, "Sometimes I wonder why I did such a horrible thing. Maybe it's because I come from another planet or another dimension and accidentally fell to Earth like a meteorite."
Okay.
The Vice interviewer had asked him what would he be doing now if he hadn't pulled the trigger back in Paris. He said, "My biggest regret is that I couldn't give my parents a grandchild. Why on earth did I pull the trigger that day? That one small action changed everything."
Okay.
He said that he feels things would have been much easier had he been given the death penalty and that it puts people out of their misery, but it totally defeats the purpose of punishment. He says it's brutal living in the public eye and constantly under surveillance and scrutiny. Such a hard fucking life. By being out in society, he has to somehow make a living and find his own shelter, and says there's no harsher punishment, and because of this, it's reason enough to never commit the same crime again.
Oh, boo-hoo.
So yeah, he's still alive. His brother's taking care of him. There was a recent movie/documentary that came out called Cannibal, which I didn't watch a lot of because it's disturbing, but he has a very obvious tremor in his hands and his brother's feeding him and he just looks really miserable, which, you know what? You deserve it. But yeah, that is Issei Sagawa and all his disgustingness.
His disgusting glory. All right, let's head on over to our next candidate, Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yeah, he's right over here.
In his own little
Look at
tent.
him.
Look at him. Just stare at him. Just point.
Stare at him, make him uncomfortable. As uncomfortable he's about to make us.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. This is Bowen Yang.
And Matt Rogers.
Co-host of the podcast Las Culturistas. We're inviting you to treat yourself with the gift of pleasure.
Yes, and who better to help facilitate that pleasure gift than Trojan, America's #1 condom brand?
I love a pleasure gift from Trojan. And Trojan Ecstasy Ultra Ribbed has a unique design that actually lets you feel the pleasure and not the condom.
Now, explain this to me. Explain how this works. Elaborate.
Oh, I'd be happy to. So this condom has extra deep ribs at the base and end to increase stimulation. So you're both sure to experience ecstasy.
Dare I ask, does this condom have lubricant?
Does Taylor Swift write songs well?
I think she does.
Yeah,
She's
I think
famously a
so.
songwriter. It's what gives her an edge over the other girls.
It has an ultra smooth premium lubricant inside and out for a more natural feel.
Now tell me about the shape. I need to know about the shape.
You are a shape girl. The Trojan Ecstasy Ultra Ribbed Comfort Shape allows free movement for a more natural experience.
Well, I'm in. I'm sold. This condom is the past, present, and future.
Pick up some Trojan Ecstasy Ultra Ribbed condoms, triple tested and trusted for over 100 years.
Trojan, feel your best. Get yours on.
Well, on May 21st, 1960, Jeffrey Dahmer was born to Joyce and Lionel Dahmer in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. By all accounts, Jeffrey had a fairly normal upbringing, though it's believed that his parents didn't spend a whole lot of time with him. So again, kind of the isolated thing. His mother had a number of psychological issues, including anxiety and dysphoria, and she was addicted to tranquilizers, even continuing to take them while pregnant with Jeffrey. His father, a chemist, would spend more time at work than at home in order to avoid the tension within the household as much as he could.
Okay.
While Jeffrey never experienced any sort of physical or mental abuse from his parents, growing up in a home where your parents frequently fight and you're more or less alone most of the time may have contributed to his reasons for his crimes later on.
Right.
Jeffrey became fascinated with dead animals by the time he was 4 years old, examining a dead crab on the beach with what was thought to be a child's curiosity.
Okay.
And even being found playing with animal bones under the front porch.
That's weird.
Yeah. When Jeffrey was 6 years old, his brother David was born, and he seemed to be the center of his parents' affections in Jeffrey's mind.
Okay.
By the time Jeffrey was 8 years old, the family had settled in Bath, Ohio. Throughout his childhood, Jeffrey continued to explore his fascination with roadkill, often taking it home to dismember it and then store the parts in jars filled with acid to be able to collect the bones later.
Oh.
He even had a small pet cemetery with little crosses and everything, presumably with more roadkill.
Okay.
Yeah. Neighbors and friends even report having found the bodies of animals impaled on trees and even a dog's head on a stake in the woods that was believed to be the work of Satanists. But Jeffrey himself admitted to the acts later on.
What? Why?
Fascinated with dead bodies, he wanted to know what was inside.
But why did you have to put the head on a stake?
Or impale them on trees, who knows. When he hit puberty, Jeffrey realized that he was gay, though he never told his parents about it and never quite came to terms with the fact. He would fantasize about an adult male jogger he'd often see running near his house, and eventually those sexual fantasies became tangled up in his dissection fantasies.
Oh. Ew.
At 16, he decided he wanted to act on his fantasy of rendering the man unconscious and having his way with him. And so he waited in the bushes with a baseball bat, but the man never passed by that day. Jeffrey admitted sometime later that this was the first time he ever attempted to attack someone.
Okay.
In high school, Jeffrey played tennis and was in the school band, though his father encouraged him to join more clubs in the hopes of his isolated son making more friends. So he was kind of the weird kid that nobody really noticed and didn't really have a whole lot of friends.
Like Sagawa.
Yeah. Most teachers and students say that Jeffrey was quiet and subdued through the majority of his school career, but by 14, he took to drinking beer and hard alcohol, claiming it was his medicine.
Oh, wow. 14.
Yep. One friend illustrated his recollections of these last years he knew Jeffrey in high school, which was turned into a movie in 2017 called My Friend Dahmer.
Okay.
The movie takes an inside look at what life must have been like for Jeffrey while he was in his junior and senior years of high school, gaining attention by throwing fake fits in the hallways and cruelly mocking conditions like cerebral palsy, after his mother had hired a decorator with the condition.
What?
Yeah, that was his shtick.
Because he wanted attention?
Yes. It was all a cry for help, and the one time he just kind of, he sort of stuttered his way through an answer in a class, again, according to a movie. And he really enjoyed the chuckles and giggles that he got from the class from doing that. So he tested it out in a hallway, and everybody got a real kick out of it.
Yeah.
He also put himself into the club photos of most clubs, even though he wasn't in any of them. That was another one of his little pranks.
Was it a prank or was it a longing to want to fit in finally?
Probably a little bit of both.
Like little bit
in the
of
movie, it was like a group of friends had sort of encouraged him to do it, but I think he'd initially had the idea of standing in the background or among these people in the pictures. And he was just kind of like blacked out by the person, the teacher that was like the head of it. Yeah. By the time Jeffrey turned 18, his parents had settled on getting divorced and his father had moved out to live in a motel. That spring, his mother took his brother David and they moved out of the house to live with relatives, leaving Jeffrey to live alone in the house until the divorce was finalized and his father would eventually move back into the house. Yes. And I believe that might be where Jeffrey got the idea that David was the favorite son in his mom's eyes. A few weeks after his high school graduation, Jeffrey was finally presented with an opportunity to act on a fantasy he had of abducting a hitchhiker and taking them home. While driving home, Jeffrey happened upon 19-year-old Stephen Hicks, who happened to be on his way home from a concert.
Okay.
Jeffrey offered him a ride back to his place to continue the party, to which Stephen agreed, and was subsequently never seen again. According to Jeffrey, when Stephen had decided it was time to head home, he didn't want him to, and thus he picked up a 10-pound weight and struck a devastating blow to the back of his head and proceeded to use the barbell to choke the life out of him.
Jeez.
Afterward, a panicked Jeffrey dismembered the body and buried it in the backyard initially, but several weeks later dug it back up to remove the flesh from the bones and dissolve it in acid before flushing the solution down the toilet. He then used a sledgehammer to smash the bones to dust, which he scattered through the woods around his home. About 6 weeks later, his father returned to the house to find Jeffrey living there alone. Jeffrey then spent an unproductive year in college, mostly drinking away in his apartment, before he ended up enlisting in the U.S. Army in 1979, where he would eventually serve as a combat medic in Baumholder, West Germany.
Okay.
His bunkmate, Billy Capshaw, mentioned in an interview that Jeffrey talked a lot about his father and how he wanted to please him. Capshaw also noted that whenever Jeffrey would drink, he would become violent, and it was a totally different side of him, as if becoming suddenly completely absent.
Oh, wow.
In 1981, he was honorably discharged after serving 2 years of his 3-year enlistment due to his continued alcohol abuse, and after living briefly in Miami, Florida, he would return home to Ohio later that year. Initially, Dahmer lived with his father upon his return, but due to his continued heavy drinking and even being slapped with a drunken disorderly charge, his father insisted he move in with his grandmother in the hopes that her influence would have a positive effect on him, as she was the only person he ever showed affection toward.
Interesting.
His time with his grandmother did have a slightly positive effect upon him, as he managed to get a job as a phlebotomist at the Milwaukee Blood Plasma Center for about 10 months, but he was then unemployed for over 2 years. During this time, Jeffrey also received a charge for indecent exposure after exposing himself at Wisconsin State Fair Park in 1982 to like a group of 25 women and children.
Oh, and children?
Yeah. In 1985, Jeffrey began working as a mixer at the Milwaukee Ambrosia Chocolate Factory, and soon after receiving a sexual proposition via note at a library, his fantasies about control and dominance began to resurface. So he hadn't thought about these things since he was in high school. He discovered Milwaukee's gay bars, bathhouses, and bookstores and began regularly going to the bathhouses, which he would later describe as relaxing places.
Okay.
However, in a statement made to police later on, Jeffrey established that he had trained himself to view people not as people, but as objects of pleasure. It has even been said that he had stolen a mannequin from a clothing store, which he used for sexual stimulation. But after it nearly scared his grandmother to death, because he kept it in the closet, she made him return it.
Okay. That's a weird fact.
I know. It is, but it was gotta have a light note in there somewhere because it's about to get real heavy.
Okay.
Jeffrey made a statement that the fact that his lovers would move during their sexual encounters would frustrate him, which is what led to him adding crushed sleeping pills to the drinks he would give them so they would be unconscious while he raped them.
So these are the men that he would find at the bathhouses? Okay.
Eventually, he was banned from the bathhouses for this practice, and so Jeffrey would use hotel rooms instead.
Okay.
Yeah. In 1986, Dahmer was again charged initially with indecent exposure for masturbating in front of a couple of 12-year-old boys by a river.
What the fuck?
But when he changed his story to say he was simply urinating and hadn't known they were there, his charge was changed to disorderly conduct, and he was sentenced to 1 year of probation, which included additional instructions to see a counselor.
Okay.
Which, to my knowledge, he never did.
Yeah.
He would just treat his probation officer as a counselor. On November 20th, 1987, Jeffrey committed his second murder, though it is one he claims he does not recall in the slightest.
What?
He had taken 25-year-old Stephen Toomey back to the room he had rented at the Ambassador Hotel, where he had planned to drug and rape the man, but says he did not intend to kill him. When he awoke the next morning, he saw Toomey laying motionless, with his chest bruised and crushed in, and a little blood coming out of the corner of his mouth.
Wow.
Jeffrey noticed he also had bruising on his fists and one forearm, presumably from attempting to break Toomey's heart from his chest.
What?
Yeah. He later revealed that that's what he thinks he was trying to do.
Was he on drugs?
No, just drunk. Blackout drunk. He left the hotel, leaving the body inside, mind you.
Okay.
To buy a large suitcase in which he transported the body back to his grandmother's house, whom he was still living with at the time.
Yeah.
In the basement, a week later, Jeffrey spent 2 hours dismembering the body and cutting the flesh from the bones again into pieces that would be small enough to handle, and putting it into plastic bags and smashing the bones with a sledgehammer.
Okay.
He then disposed of the remains in the trash, excluding the head, which he kept wrapped in a blanket until he boiled it in a mixture of Soilex and bleach a couple weeks later, in order to retain the skull, which he used to stimulate masturbation.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Okay.
2 months later, Dahmer lured 14-year-old James Dockstader into his home by offering him $50 to pose for nude photos before subsequently drugging and strangling him, leaving the body for a week and disposing of it the way he had with Toomey's.
14.
Yes, 14. On March 24th, 1988, Dahmer lured Richard Guerrero, 22 years old, back to his home with another $50 incentive, but this time simply to spend the rest of the night with him.
Okay. Spend the rest of the night and the rest of his life.
Again, he proceeded to drug and strangle Guerrero, but this time he also performed oral sex on the corpse, and even disposed of the body within 24 hours of the murder instead of waiting a week like he had been previously. In September of that same year, his grandmother asked him to move out because she was tired of his habit of bringing young men to her home late in the night and the awful smells coming from the basement and garage.
Come on, Grandma. Be smart. Look at what your grandson is doing.
Right. He soon found his apartment at the Oxford Apartments on North 25th Street, where he moved into number 213. The day after moving into his apartment, Dahmer was arrested for drugging and fondling a 13-year-old boy,
Oh, God.
whom he had lured to his apartment under the pretext of posing for nude photos. By May 23rd, 1989, Dahmer was sentenced to 5 years probation, with 1 year in the House of Correction for second-degree sexual assault and enticing a child for immoral purposes. He was also required to register as a sex offender, and during this time, he had to move back in with his grandmother. Between the time of his arrest and his sentencing, Dahmer murdered his fifth victim, 26-year-old Anthony Sears, on March 25th, 1989. According to Dahmer himself, Sears was the first victim he had found exceptionally attractive, and he decided to preserve his head and genitalia in acetone and stored them in a locked box which his father nearly discovered. Jeffrey stated that his father had discovered the box and asked what was in it, to which Jeffrey answered that it was porn, but his father wasn't satisfied with that answer and attempted to break open the box before eventually the two of them reconciled and his father left it alone. In May of 1990, he returned to his apartment and also murdered his sixth victim, Raymond Smith, 33 years old, also luring him back to his apartment with the promise of $50 for sex and proceeding to drug and strangle him. The following day, Dahmer decided to go out and buy a Polaroid camera to be able to take suggestively posed pictures of Smith's corpse before dismembering him in the bathroom and boiling his body in a Soylix mixture and disposing of the skeleton minus the skull in a drum filled with acid.
Wow.
In June of 1990, Dahmer lured, drugged, and strangled 27-year-old Eddie Smith, but instead of immediately putting the body in acid, he put it in the freezer for several months in the hopes of it retaining moisture and the bones not becoming brittle in the process afterward.
That's weird.
So every time he would bleach bones, they would get brittle and they would fall apart and he'd have to dispose of them anyway. So he wants to keep these things forever.
Oh, darn.
Yeah. So he's trying to perfect his method. However, the skull was destroyed in the oven when Dahmer was attempting to dry it out, and it exploded.
God.
Apparently, Jeffrey stated to investigators that he felt rotten about Smith's death, as he was unable to retain any of his body parts.
That's what you feel rotten about?
Yep, that's the only reason he feels rotten about his death. It's because he couldn't keep anything. Less than 3 months later, Dahmer picked up Ernest Miller, a 22-year-old, and brought him back to his apartment for $50. Again. On this occasion, Dahmer didn't have quite enough sleeping pills to render Miller unconscious for long enough and ended up cutting his carotid artery when Miller awoke and subsequently bled to death minutes later.
Wow.
After posing the body for photos and then dismembering it in the bathtub, Dahmer saved Miller's heart, biceps, and portions of his legs in plastic bags to store in his fridge to eat later on. Yep.
Oh,
Here's
random.
the thing about biceps.
Just like Sagawa had a thing about thighs and butts.
Yep. Hearts and biceps are Dahmer's thing. On September 24th, Dahmer lured 23-year-old David Thomas back to his apartment for drinks and to take pictures of him, but admitted to no longer feeling attracted to Thomas after drugging him.
Okay. What?
So he strangled him to death out of fear of Thomas being angry about being drugged if he awoke. But though he did not retain any part of him after the disposal process, he took pictures of the process. And I do believe this was the first time he ever took pictures of the disposal process.
Yeah, he just took pictures of the body afterwards.
In February of 1991, Dahmer picked up 19-year-old Curtis Strotter, took him home, and proceeded to drug, strangle, and dismember him. Dahmer kept the boy's head, hands, and genitals, and also photographed the dismemberment process. Approximately 2 months later, Dahmer lured 19-year-old Errol Lindsay to his apartment where he did his usual drugging, but Dahmer decided to drill a hole into Lindsay's skull
No.
and pour hydrochloric acid in the hopes of making him into a sort of submissive zombie. However, Lindsay awoke afterwards saying, "I have a headache. What time is it?"
Oh.
And so Dahmer drugged him once more and proceeded to strangle and dismember him.
Oh my god.
This time attempting to preserve his skin in cold water and salt.
Hey, it's Nikki Glazer. And even reading about Trojan Ecstasy Ultra Rib condoms is kind of getting me juiced up, if you know what I'm saying. Each Trojan Ecstasy Ultra Rib condom has ultra smooth premium lubricant inside and out for a more natural feel. You guys know I love lube. I don't leave home without it. And now I'll leave my bottle at home and just bring the condoms. Also, they have extra deep ribs at the base and end to increase stimulation. So these condoms are for both of you, really. This condom has a unique design that lets you feel the pleasure and not the condom. To be honest with you, if I went out with a guy and when we're getting down, he brings out a Trojan Ecstasy Ultra Ribbed condom, I'd be like, this dude knows what he's doing and he's considered me in this. Thank you. When I think condoms, I think Trojan condoms. So try Trojan Ecstasy Ultra Ribbed condoms. Triple tested and trusted for over 100 years. Feel your best. Get yours on.
Before having to dispose of it later.
Why?
When it didn't work.
Oh, come on.
I think he's just experimenting at this point.
Yeah.
Now, by this point, neighbors have repeatedly complained of the smells and noises coming from apartment 213.
Right?
But Jeffrey had managed to excuse them all by claiming issues with his refrigerator breaking and meat spoiling, or his toilet getting backed up, or his fish dying.
Okay.
On May 26, 1991, Jeffrey happened upon, by pure coincidence, the younger brother of the boy whom he had molested in 1988, 14-year-old Conorak Synthasmophone, and lured the initially reluctant boy back to his apartment to pose for pictures.
Mm-hmm.
Dahmer drugged the boy after taking a couple pictures of him in his underwear and proceeded to perform oral sex on him. He proceeded to drill a hole into Conorak's head and inject hydrochloric acid into his frontal lobe before leading the boy back to his bedroom, where the body of the man he killed 3 days prior, 31-year-old Tony Hughes, lay naked on the floor.
What?
Yeah. In an interview, he even stated something along the lines of, he knew Conorak had seen the body, or he believes he did, and he didn't react. So he thinks what he did worked.
Okay.
After Conorak fell unconscious, Dahmer left to drink at the bar and buy more alcohol. Early the following morning, as Dahmer was on his way back home, he noticed the boy outside attempting to talk with some of the neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
Conorak was naked and appeared drunk. Jeffrey attempted to take the boy by the arm, but the women were adamant about not letting him leave and informed him that they had already called the police.
Yeah.
When the police arrived, Jeffrey explained that Conorak was his 19-year-old lover and they had simply had a fight, and John Mung, the alias he gave Conorak, had gotten drunk.
Mm-hmm.
The women continued to try and insist that something was wrong, but the officers harshly told them not to interfere and assisted Jeffrey in bringing Conorak back to his apartment, where they noted a strange smell but did not investigate.
Oh, God.
Does it please you to know they were suspended afterwards?
Yeah?
Yeah. So they did have consequences for just
Good.
blatantly ignoring all of this, but unfortunately it doesn't help Conorak. After a second injection of hydrochloric acid proved fatal for Conorak, Dahmer devoted the next day to dismembering the bodies and called off work. He again retained the victims' skulls. Traveling to Chicago on June 30th, Dahmer encountered 20-year-old Matt Turner, whom he convinced to let him drive back to his apartment for a photo shoot, and proceeded to kill him and keep his organs and head in plastic bags in his freezer. On July 5th, Dahmer enticed 23-year-old Jeremiah Weinberger to spend the weekend with him at his apartment and proceeded to drug him and then inject boiling water into his skull,
Oh.
putting him in a coma, which he died from 2 days later.
It really does seem like he's just experimenting.
He really is. He's just seeing what works and what doesn't, and it's sick.
Yeah.
Dahmer met 24-year-old Oliver Lacey on July 15th and convinced him to return to his apartment to take nude photos and engage in some sexual activity again.
Mm-hmm.
Dahmer stated that he wanted to prolong his time with Lacey while he was alive, but after failing to chloroform him, he strangled him and had sex with the corpse.
Jeez.
He kept Lacey's head and heart in the fridge and his skeleton in the freezer.
Okay.
On July 19th, Dahmer was informed that he was fired from his job, and so he went out and found 25-year-old Joseph Bradhoft and brought him back to the apartment, where he strangled him and left the body on his bed covered with a sheet for 2 days.
Okay.
And after those 2 days, he pulled the sheet back, saw maggots on the head,
Ew.
and then took yet another day to dispose of the 2 bodies he had. On July 22nd, 1991, Dahmer lured Tracy Edwards to his apartment, and this would prove to be the last time he would ever play this game with anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Edwards was smart and made note of many weird things upon entering the apartment, including a foul smell and boxes of hydrochloric acid.
Yeah, that's fucking weird.
Yeah. But he said he was cleaning bricks.
With hydrochloric acid?
He had an excuse for everything.
Yeah, which doesn't make sense.
I know.
Why are you cleaning bricks? Why? For what? To bash someone over the head with?
Right. Dahmer distracted Edwards and closed a handcuff around one of his wrists, which alarmed Edwards, but Dahmer was unable to cuff both wrists.
Yeah.
He convinced Edwards to follow him to the bedroom to take nude photos before pulling a large knife and again stating his intent to take nude photos of the man.
With a knife?
Yep.
Okay.
After patiently awaiting a chance to make a break for it, mind you, Edwards was in this apartment for approximately 5 hours.
Oh.
Edwards eventually flees the apartment and manages to flag down a pair of Milwaukee police officers.
Mm-hmm.
They note the handcuff dangling from Edwards' wrist, and he proceeds to tell them all about the freak who had done it to him and asks them if they'll remove it. They are unable to as their key doesn't fit, so they accompany Edwards back to Dahmer's apartment where Jeffrey lets the 3 men in and tells them he was indeed the one who cuffed Edwards.
Okay.
Edwards also mentions the large knife in the bedroom, which Dahmer makes no comment about, but tells the officers he keeps the key in his bedside table.
Mm-hmm.
When Officer Mueller enters the bedroom, he makes note of the knife under the bed and also happens to notice a drawer full of Polaroid pictures, many containing images of human bodies in various stages of dismemberment.
Yeah.
He also makes note of a lot of the settings in these pictures are the apartment they're in.
Yeah.
Mueller brought some of the photos out to his partner, at which point Dahmer attempted to resist arrest, but was pinned to the floor quickly, and the officers called for backup.
Mm-hmm.
Upon looking in the fridge, Mueller discovered a freshly severed head of an African-American man.
Jeez.
It's reported that, while pinned under the officer, Dahmer turned his head and said, "For what I did, I should be dead."
Yeah.
Upon further investigation by Milwaukee's Criminal Investigation Bureau, they turned up 4 severed heads in the kitchen, 7 human skulls, some painted, some bleached, in his bedroom and bathroom closet,
Okay.
2 entire skeletons, a pair of severed hands, 2 severed and preserved penises, a mummified scalp, and 3 more dismembered torsos dissolving in acid in a 57-gallon drum.
Oh, God.
Within the fridge, they found blood drippings on a tray at the bottom, 2 human hearts, and a portion of muscle wrapped in plastic bags. In the freezer, they found a torso, a bag of organs, and flesh stuck to the ice at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the scene made many of the officers sick.
Yeah, that's making me sick right now.
In the days following his arrest, Dahmer was fully cooperative with police and confessed to the murders of 16 men in Wisconsin since 1987 and 1 in Ohio in 1978.
Mm-hmm.
He described to investigators in vivid detail what he had done to the victims and their bodies, including necrophilia and the cannibalistic act of consuming their hearts, livers, biceps, and portions of their thighs.
Mm-hmm.
He told of posing the bodies in sexually suggestive positions and photographing them, and his process of preserving the parts he wished to keep. When asked why he wanted to keep the full skeletons of victims as well as multiple skulls, Dahmer stated that he had intended to create an altar as a place he could meditate on his acts and draw power.
What?
Yep. By September 14th, 1991, Dahmer was charged with the murders of 16 men. He was not charged with the attempted murder of Edwards nor the murder of Toomey, as the judge would not bring murder charges where it could not be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So since Dahmer could not remember, they didn't charge him for that one. Dahmer pled guilty but insane to 15 counts of murder on January 13th, 1992. Court psychologists and psychiatrists had determined Dahmer to be sane, though they did diagnose him with Asperger's and antisocial personality disorder.
Yeah, to name a few.
Yeah. Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to 15 life sentences plus 10 years attached to those sentences and another 70 on the 13 life sentences. Essentially boiling down to a sentence of approximately 999 years in prison.
Oh my God. Is that a record?
I honestly don't know. The death penalty wasn't an option to consider as it had been abolished in Wisconsin in 1853.
Oh, okay.
Dahmer was subsequently sent to the Columbia Correctional Institution, where he spent his first year in solitary confinement, as authorities were concerned about what would happen to him if he came in contact with other inmates, so they were afraid for his physical safety. After that first year, Dahmer requested to be transferred to a less secure unit and even began to find religion again.
Okay, whatever.
An attempt was made on his life in July 1994 when a fellow inmate attempted to slash his throat with a razor embedded in a toothbrush,
Oh.
but was unsuccessful, and Dahmer only received minor wounds.
Mm-hmm.
It's said that he was prepared to accept any punishment that was brought upon him, and it's fairly evident in his interviews. He seems very resigned.
Yeah.
In one of his last interviews, he tells the reporter that he is the only one to blame for his actions. Nothing and no one else. Not porn, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't do these things out of hate.
Okay.
On November 28th, 1994, Dahmer and another inmate were assaulted in the showers while they were left unattended for 20 minutes. Both were still alive, but later died from the trauma to their heads from the beating. Dahmer's head was repeatedly struck against a wall and beaten with a metal bar.
Oh, wow.
So after only about 2 years in prison, he was killed.
2 years of his 1,000 years in prison.
Mm-hmm. I read about
Wow.
the effect these murders had on the LGBTQ plus community in Milwaukee afterwards, and surprisingly, it was a positive one.
Mm-hmm.
His actions were not to credit fully for the changes but that the community has seen over the years, but they definitely had an impact. In the 80s, it wasn't nearly as acceptable to be a member of the LGBTQ plus community as it is
Yeah.
today, and it was really more of something that was kept in the shadows. So you're just kind of shunned from society.
Mm-hmm.
These people were viewed as having no right to exist, and many of them went by nicknames to conceal their real identities.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't uncommon for these people to just disappear, either because they were transient or because they had succumbed to AIDS, which was fairly widespread and rampant at the time.
Yeah.
So people go missing, you don't even know who they were, and they essentially had no idea that there was a serial killer in their midst.
So it was very easy for
they
Dahmer
were
to get victims.
to operate for as long as he did as well.
Yeah,
Like
for
he killed
sure.
17 people, and they were all, within a certain, appearance, sexual orientation, about
Yeah.
the same age groups, and nobody saw any sort of connection because they didn't even know they were missing.
Mm-hmm.
His crimes came as a complete shock to everyone because they had all had the mentality of that kind of thing doesn't happen here, but then it did.
Yeah.
There was a fear of going out for a while after the crimes came to light, and people started using their real names at gay bars and clubs in an effort to promote safety for themselves, so they felt more emboldened to make themselves known.
Yeah.
And that is probably the only good thing that came out of what he did.
Yeah. People being more safe, but also feeling like they can.
Yeah. And that is Jeffrey Dahmer. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving. Okay. Well, if you enjoyed your tour today,
We hope you did anyway.
yep, we're sorry. Please leave us a review on wherever you booked your tour. Reviews help us grow and reach more listeners so we can provide you with more tours. Remember to visit our website at nopevillepodcast.com where you'll have access to our show notes and anything we reference in today's tour, and you'll be able to find and follow us on all of our social media for updates, polls, events, or just interacting with us, which is Nopeville on Twitter and Nopeville Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. If you want to be a part of our campfire stories, which are stories you submit for us to read, either fiction or nonfiction, you can submit them through the Contact Us form on our website and select campfire stories, or send an email to us at nopevillepodcast@gmail.com, and be sure to write campfire stories in your subject line so we know what you're emailing us about. And no tour is complete without first stopping by the gift shop before you leave. Go ahead and click on the gift shop on our website and be sure to pick up a souvenir for yourself and a loved one.
For Black Friday, we're going to be doing 25% off everything in the store.
Yeah.
So
get your holiday shopping done early, or you
Yeah.
can just buy something for yourself,
Yeah.
2020 has been a bitch, so treat yourself. And last but not least, gratuity isn't required, but sure is appreciated. Visit our Patreon to see how you can support us and get some awesome rewards in return.
Yeah.
So yeah, this was a heavy episode, guys, and we hope that you stuck it out if you decided to, but if you didn't, no
understand.
No harm, no foul. We understand.
We didn't want to be here either.
So we're going to quickly move away from the cannibal side of Nopeville, and happy Thanksgiving,
For those of you that celebrate it anyway.
and we hope to see you again on our next tour.
Bye.
Bye!
Excellent. I see most of you returned, and relatively unscathed. Bravo. I hope you enjoyed your visit to Nopeville, and look forward to seeing you again next time.
Thanks again for listening to Scary Time by Indie Drop-In Network. Check out all of Indie Drop-In shows at indiedropin.com. If you would like your show featured, reach out to us at Indie Drop-In on all social media or go to indiedropin.com.